As soon as you go into SEAL training, you begin to understand yourself at your raw self, and you begin to understand your teammates at their raw selves, which gives you the ability to now, I know exactly what and how we're going to show up when everything is going to hell in a handbasket. And that is a superpower. Skills are not inherent to our nature. In other words, none of us are born with the ability to ride a bike or throw a ball or drive a car. We're trained to do those things, and we're taught to do those things. So attributes, on the other hand, are inherent to our nature. In other words, all of us are born with levels of patience, adaptability, situational awareness.
Before we get into the show, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our sponsor, First Human, of which I am a co-founder. First Human is dedicated to extraordinary impact in the world through exceptional leadership. So if you're looking to elevate the leadership of your team or your organization, then do check us out. We also offer one-to-one coaching. So if you'd like to get coached by me or one of my extraordinarily talented fellow coaches, then head over to firsthuman.com. And with that, back to the show. Welcome to another episode of Being Human. Delighted to say I'm here with Rich Diviney. He's the author of book, the wonderful The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. He's a retired US Navy commander. He's the founder of Attributes Incorporated. Rich, a very warm welcome to Being Human.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. So thanks for having me.
No, thank you. And as I like to do with all my guests, I love to hear the backstory. Obviously, I know a little bit of it from having read your book, but our listeners may not have done. So, yeah, fill us in a little bit about your childhood, a bit about where you grew up, your parents, and some of those formative experiences that led you on the path to becoming a Navy SEAL, and then ultimately, of course, to doing what you're doing now.
Yes, of course. Well, I grew up in New England, in Connecticut, a little town right on Long Island Sound, and so early on, my mom would take us to the beach every day of the summer, and so I was a water rat from day one. I just loved everything about being in the water and playing in the water. But meanwhile, at the same time, my dad, he was a private pilot. He used to take us flying on the weekends because he loved flying, and so my brother and I got this real love for flying and got this goal to become military pilots, and specifically Navy pilots, because we figured landing on a ship, there's nothing harder than landing a jet on a ship. And so that's what we figured we'd do. And that was our bent until probably early 90s when I discovered the Navy SEALs. No one really knew about them, but I read this article about these guys and I was like, man, these guys seem pretty awesome. They do everything. They're like parachute and they're in all different environments, but they originate from the water. It's a lot of underwater stuff. So I was like, that's cool. So I went to university, was in an ROTC program, which meant I got commissioned as an officer upon graduation, and I selected I tried out and was selected for SEAL training in 1996. Went to SEAL training, made it through, which is always an accomplishment because not many people do. But
that was on your first attempt.
I was on my first attempt. Well, officers don't get 2 attempps. If you don't, as an officer, if you don't make it, you're not going back. And so, it's one time, only time. So yeah, made it through, and then of course began a career which started slow.
And I'm just intrigued. What was the number that made it through in your cohort?
Yeah, we started with 170 people, and 38 of us graduated. So that's the standard. The attrition rate so BUDS, basic underwater demolition / SEAL training is the training course, and the attrition rate is somewhere usually between 10 and 15%. 85 and 90%, I guess, attrition, right? So only 10 to 15% make it through. Those are normal numbers. But yes. The beginning, the first 5 years was fine, but obviously nothing going on. Of course, then 9/11 happened, and the world got very busy, and ended up deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan several times. I think Iraq 7 times and Afghanistan 5 times, plus other deployments. But I was commander of a troop, of a platoon, and even commanding officer of a squadron. I also ran selection and assessment for one of our specialized commands, which is really where I began to really take interest and dive deeply into performance, what performance is, how to define it, and what makes top performers and what makes high performing teams. And so So that really stuck with me. I ended up retiring, coming out of the Navy, retiring in 2017, went into the leadership space with my friend Simon Sinek and the Chapman and Co. Institute as well. But also in doing that, realized that a lot of businesses and teams and organizations were having the same issues we were in terms of defining performance. And so that's when I decided to write a book, the book that you have in your hands about this idea of the attributes. And since then founded the Attributes Incorporated with my wife, and we've been at it ever since, which has been a really wonderful experience, both to grow the business and also be able to work together. So, and then just to kind of put the cherry on the top, the real meaning, the meaningful stuff about my life is that I am married to my wife for 23 years, and we have two wonderful kids. They're 19 and 17, and they're really the impetus and the focus of everything. So yeah.
Yeah, and I was touched as I read through the book how you relate that. You describe your marriage as a high performing team.
Yeah.
I love that, and that you relayed some of the attributes back to your wife, which I appreciated as I read. To slow it right down, because I know there's going to be, and I have certain intrigue around the Buds training, and there's this mystique out here. So I really want to dive into the leadership book and to the attributes, but I'd love to hear, what was your toughest moment in Buds, and when did you know you were going to make it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that question, so I appreciate it because I love new questions I've never been asked. So the first question is, when was my toughest moment? I think my toughest moment was, in fact, the first few weeks. Because I did not really know what to expect. I'd read some books and things like that, but it's really you don't really know until you get there. And I think it was the first few weeks where it was hitting me how, man, this is really different than I thought it would be. You go to Navy SEAL training, you think, I'm going to be this super badass, kind of Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme type, Arnold Schwarzenegger type guy, and you realize no, it's not that at all. It's actually very tough, and all that movie stuff is pretty much false. So I think those first few weeks were when I really said, man, I really have to gut it out, and this is going to be a long haul. The second question is an interesting one, because I don't think I never considered quitting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's not like I ever felt like I was not going to make it through. I kind of knew, for me, the goal was to make it through. Now, the caveat, or I guess the note to that, is you cannot make it through that type of training if you are thinking about the end, because it's way too long and way too arduous. So I think the guys who make it through are the guys who actually detach from the overall goal, at least temporarily, and just focus on a day-to-day, sometimes minute-to-minute type survival. And I'm gonna get through this next thing, and then we'll see what the next thing is after that. And after that, I'll get through that thing, and I'll get, and you just keep on kind of, you put your head down and you go step by step, which is remarkably powerful, because the lesson is kind of, it's an unconscious genius what they're teaching you, because that's exactly what you have to do when you're in war and in combat. If the totality of what's going on oftentimes is much too overwhelming, and you have to, in those moments of real true chaos, start thinking about, okay, what are those things I can immediately focus on and take control of, do that, and then what's the next thing, and do that. And I think Buds trains you to do that. So the saying in Buds, especially during Hell Week, which I'm not sure if your audience knows, but the crucible of Buds is a week called Hell Week, where you start on a Sunday afternoon, and they basically run you till the following Friday, and you only sleep for about 2 hours the entire week. The entire week. Yeah, the entire week you only sleep for about 2 hours. The rest of the time you're running around with heavy boats and freezing, and so you get most quitters during Hell Week. That's the crucible. But the saying is that if you think about Friday of Hell Week on Monday, you will quit. And that it couldn't be more true, because you can't think about the entirety. So I don't think I ever thought about quitting. In terms of when did I know I was going to make it, I mean, I started thinking about the end maybe with a few weeks left. That's when I started thinking about the end. That's when you start looking forward to it. But before then, you don't even think about it.
Right. Well, that's pretty extraordinary. And had you, well, first of all, the no sleep thing. Are you? I mean, my understanding, if you go that long without sleep, I've never done that. Are you starting to hallucinate? Are you
Oh yeah.
questioning your sanity?
Yeah, you're definitely hallucinating. You definitely there's not much you're able to do. They're not asking you in those moments to do much in terms of performance. So they're not like doing anything complex or too super dangerous. What they're basically training you to do is understand you can go way far beyond what you think you can do, and your body's limits are only limited to what your mind's is able to do. So while I would say you're certainly degraded to a high degree by day 5, you still understand that I can push myself. I can go through. I can make this happen. Which again is a remarkably powerful lesson in terms of human endurance. So I think that's why they do it. Did I ever have to go 5 days without sleep during my career? No, I didn't. But there were times where I had to operate on a lot less sleep than I wanted to, and I knew I could.
Right. Yeah. And was this transformative for you, or do you think you came in? I mean, this sort of speaks to the thesis of your book, or did you come in with a lot of these attributes and they just got tested during buds?
Yeah, another wonderful question. I think it was probably a little bit of both. I think you have to. I think all the candidates that make it through show up with a specific set of attributes that they already have a predominance of. Otherwise, you won't make it through the first day. Let alone
Oh, really? You get
yeah.
people drop out the first day?
Oh yeah, I mean yeah, all the time. And so I think you show up with some attributes, and then I think what happens is that you also hyper develop other attributes.
Okay.
So it is transformative in the sense it's like, man, I knew I had that, but man, now I know I have it to like the nth degree, which is cool. So I think both of those conditions exist.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And if you were to, if you were to name a pattern that you saw consistently through those who didn't make it, what would that be, or were there a set of patterns that you picked
Yeah.
up?
Well, so the community's been trying to figure that one out for 60 years, because if they could figure that out, they could probably reduce the attrition rate. But I won't gaff. I won't gaff off the question. I will say that I would say that those folks who don't make it through, there's obviously multiple reasons. A lot of guys, they get there and they're like, this is not what I thought it was. I don't want to do this, right? It's as simple as
Okay.
that. And that's completely, I get it, because it's not like you thought it was when you get there. So they realize they don't want to do it. Others, they want to do it, but they simply can't. They cannot compartmentalize to the extent that is needed, and so they get overwhelmed with desires that they can't do it, or desire to quit, or desire to end and be comfortable. And that's, I think, my hypothesis. Again, this is not set in stone, but my hypothesis is because they don't have enough of the ability to compartmentalize and say, I'm just going to focus on this moment and I'm not going to think about the next moment. I think part of the ability is to not worry about that which you cannot control, and that is to the nth degree. I mean, there's so much you can't control in that environment, that you just don't worry about it. And if I put energy into worrying about it, that depletes a lot of energy. Worry is a very high energy endeavor, but both from a neurological and physiological state. It takes a lot of energy to just to worry. And I think what people don't realize, and certainly guys don't realize in that, is that if you worry about stuff, you are depleting yourself and leaving yourself with less energy to actually do the thing. And so
Right.
you'll find that every Navy SEAL, none of us worry about that which we can't control, even in chaos and crisis. We say, hey, if I can't control in the moment, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm only going to worry about what I can control in this moment. And if there's things I need to keep cognizant of that might be coming in the future, I'll keep cognizant of it, but I'm not going to spend energy towards those things that I can't shape in the moment.
Right. I love that answer, because I notice it. I know in the book you mentioned compartmentalization as one of the attributes.
Yeah.
But the way you framed it there in terms of energy management makes a lot of sense. It's not about just the ability to put something out of mind. It's the implication that you conserve energy by doing that.
Yes.
and you can keep certainly in the context of buds or any high pressure situation.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
That's
you're using the other attribute I talk about right next to compartmentalization is task switching, and task switching is almost the other side of compartmentalization, the ability to shift your focus between different contexts and categories, and task switching. When you shift focus, that takes energy. Now, the question is, are you doing it deliberately, or are you doing it non-deliberately or unconsciously? Because you're worrying about stuff. In other words, I'm focusing on something I can't control. That is taking energy. Or just to bring it into a modern day sense of all of us in today's environment, a lot of us task switch multiple, sometimes hundreds of times a day, and we do it unconsciously. And it's because of these little devices we have in our hands that that constantly are grabbing at our attention. So whether it's vibrating or ringing or binging or whatever, or clicking, that is shifting our focus, and we have to understand that that's very energy intensive for our brains. And so if we wonder why we might be exhausted at the end of the day, it might be because we've been asking our brains to task switch way too often. And so there's now, of course, there's a balance between compartmentalization and task switching. In other words, what we're able to do is we're able to compartmentalize, i.e. focus on something, but maintain a slight awareness, because if the priority changes, then we can shift focus, right? But our goal is we're going to focus on this until I complete it. However, if in the conduct of completion, something comes into our environment that immediately takes priority, then I will task switch and refocus. And so I think there's a dance there that happens mentally that you learn how to really master in something like SEAL training and beyond. Again, you don't think about it. I get a kick out of articulating these things. You don't think, you just do it without thinking. But I like trying to articulate it, because then we can hopefully teach people about it.
Yeah, well, I know the way you described that, and you're absolutely right. Whatever our innate ability is to compartmentalize, with these things around, yeah, we're going to be challenged to the nth degree, even if we naturally have a very high level of aptitude to keep distractions out of our immediate attention.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for giving me a dive into buds training, to excusing the pun. But so you've now had this fantastic career, in the Navy. You were actually a trainer, as you mentioned, but then you came out, worked with Simon Sinek, and he actually endorses your book. What an endorsement to have on the cover. And you've written this book, The Attribute. So let's start with definitions. What is an attribute?
Yes. So an attribute, the way I want to kind of bifurcate these terms in terms of performance is the difference between attributes and skills. And so just kind of to lay it out together so it's in sequence is, a skill is, skills are not inherent to our nature. In other words, none of us are born with the ability to ride a bike or throw a ball, or drive a car. We're trained to do those things, and we're taught to do those things. Okay. Skills also direct our behavior in known and specific environments. So here's how and when to throw a ball, or ride a bike, or drive a car. And then because skills are very visible, they're very easy to assess, measure, and test. You can see how well anybody does any one of those things. You can put scores around skills. You can put statistics around skills. You can put skills on resumes, which is why we often get seduced by skills when we're picking teams or hiring or even performance evaluating. The problem with skills is skills don't tell us how we're going to show up or how we're going to behave in stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because in an unknown environment, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill. So this is when we start leaning on attributes. Attributes, on the other hand, are inherent to our nature. In other words, all of us are born with levels of patience, adaptability, situational awareness. Now, you can certainly develop attributes over time and experience, yes, but you can see levels of this stuff in very small children. In other words, anybody who has small kids or has been with small kids will agree with me when I say there are 1.5-year-olds who are patient and there are 1.5-year-olds who are impatient. Okay, so there's a nature nurture element to attributes.
I've got 2 7-year-old boys can confirm.
Yeah. So now attributes also don't direct our behavior; they inform our behavior. So in other words, they tell us how we're going to show up to an environment. My son's levels of perseverance and resilience informed the way he showed up when he was learning the skill of riding a bike, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so. And then finally, because they're difficult to see, they're very difficult to assess, measure, and test. How do you measure someone's levels of patience or adaptability? But you can see these they show up the most visibly and viscerally during times of stress, challenge, and uncertainty. And so the idea is if we're not considering attributes in our performance picture, we are missing probably the most important part of our performance, because it's our performance at our most raw. If we want to understand how and why we perform the way we do at our most raw, i.e. when the you-know-what hits the fan and when we're dropped into uncertainty and chaos, we need to understand our attributes and where we show up and our levels that we have on each of those attributes.
Right. And these are not personality traits.
I would say that they're part of personality traits. In other words, a personality is something that's developed over time that adds a bunch of things into a nice cauldron, blended and stewed together. So a personality consists of, yes, some attributes, but also values, beliefs, environments, ideologies, all those things kind of combine and combine together to create a personality. But the reason why I kind of separate is because, and again, I love the personality. I love most of the personality assessment tools out there. The reason why we talk about attributes is that when the you-know-what hits the fan, personality generally goes out the window. I always use my wife as an example. If you met her, if you were to meet her, you'd realize she's a kind, bubbly, gregarious, lovely, just positive human being. When the you-know-what hits the fan, that all goes out the window. Okay, and she's running on attributes. And so I've always been fascinated, and I think it's because of what I went through in terms of SEAL training and working with some of the top performers in the planet. I've always been fascinated with who our raw self is. Who's that person that shows up when we are steeped in uncertainty and chaos? Because if you know that about yourself, it's like having a superpower. And I think SEAL training gives that to you, because as soon as you go into SEAL training, you begin to understand yourself at your raw self, and you begin to understand your teammates at their raw selves, which gives you the ability to now, I know exactly what and how we're going to show up when everything is going to hell in a handbasket. And that is a superpower. And that's not limited to just Navy SEALs. Any of us can figure this out if we focus on what our attributes are.
Right. And the second chapter of your book, I enjoyed. Sorry, the third chapter of your book, the Dream Team Paradox. And explain to me, how this plays into team selection. As you lay out in that chapter.
Yeah, I call it the Dream Team Paradox because often we find ourselves kind of locked into this trap of picking the best people based on skills. And so we pick a team based on, the best graphics designer, best marketer, the best lawyer, the best whatever, systems design, all these best people. And we put them all together and we say, this is going to be the best team. It's the dream team, right? And it's quite often that team is great when things are going great. But when things go sideways and the you-know-what hits the fan, that team generally turns toxic. And there's a reason behind that. It's because if we put together our teams based on skills, just skills, we're not focusing on the right thing. I was researching a guy years ago, and I talk about in the book, this guy named Russell Ackoff. Russell Ackoff was a systems theorist. He was a behavioral analyst and a management science expert. And he used to talk about and relate systems theory to business and management. Fascinating guy. I think he died in the early 2000s, but he was interesting to watch his videos. And one of the things he used to ask his audiences when he, or his students when he taught, he'd say, listen, if I took the best parts of every best vehicle on the planet and put them all together. So take the one car has the best engine, another car has the best carburetor, another car has the best frame. If I took the best parts of every best vehicle on the planet and put them all together in the center of the room, would I have the best vehicle on the planet? And the answer is no. You wouldn't even have a car because the parts wouldn't fit together. And he said, a system is never just the sum of its parts. It's a product of their interaction. And the same goes with a team. A team is never just the sum of its parts. It's a product of how they interact. So if you build a team based on just the best skills, and you're not focusing on how they actually interact as a team, that team's going to turn toxic when things go sideways. And so this is where attributes helps us. If we have attributes, we understand and we put together a team based on attributes. Now we're talking about the qualities of the human beings that allow them to not only perform, but also work and integrate together. And that's what builds the highest performing teams. And so that's the work we've been doing with companies and organizations, helping them do that based on attributes.
Right. And are you saying there is a desired set of attributes that is more likely to predict a high performing team? Or are you saying that a high performing team requires a range of attributes,
Yeah.
or are you saying something else?
Yeah, no, I'm saying a little bit of both. In other words, there's a required set of attributes that defines a high performing team. But the kicker is that every team, every niche is different. So the attributes required to be a great Navy SEAL team, that list will look different than the attributes required to be a great surgical team or teaching team or sales team, right? So each team and organization has their own unique list. And what we need to do as leaders and as team builders is to understand what components we're putting together, what people bring so that we can actually build the best teams. We have to understand what that list looks like inside of our own niche. I can't, for example, take a bunch of accountants out to SEAL training and throw them in the surf zone and expect that to tell me what kind of accountants they're going to be. It's not contextual. So the list for accountants is going to look different, as will the selection processes for accountants.
Right. Got it. One thing that came to mind as I was reading this was, is there, just playing devil's advocate for a second, is there a risk, though, that if teams get too focused on worrying about what attributes they've got and developing their attributes that in line with what they think the ideal set is, that takes energy away and focus away from ultimately the end result that the team is trying to achieve?
Yeah, it's a great question. The idea is that if you focus on the attributes, what you realize is that none of us can have all of them, it's in fact our unique kind of performance fingerprint that is essential to the team. And if we understand that, we can begin to mesh things together. So in other words, you might not even need to develop attributes if you're low on one. I always say when you look at your attributes profile, and again, if you get your attributes profile and you have your top one, like 1 to 41, so you have your top 5, your bottom 5, your success in life is it's based just as much on your top 5 as your bottom 5. In other words, your bottom 5, you being low on those 5 are exactly why you're successful in what you're doing, right? It's good. There's no judgment in the attributes. Now, does having that top 5 and bottom 5 also produce maybe some blind spots? And there are times it doesn't serve you? Absolutely. And we have to do that analysis. In other words, being high on these, there are certain environments where it doesn't serve me or could be detrimental, and I have to be cognizant of those. But what you also say is, on a team, now that I know this, I can start to mesh. So my wife and I are a great example. Patience. We've been married 23 years. She is an impatient person. In other words, she comes up low on patience on the assessment. I'm a patient person. I come up high on patience on the assessment. That's worked beautifully for us in our 23-year marriage, because when patience has been required, I step up. When impatience is required, she steps up. And her impatience has prevented me from sometimes taking too long on a decision or procrastinating or whatever. My patience has sometimes prevented her from running too quickly into a decision or moving too quickly on something. So when you start understanding these attributes, you in fact move faster, because you start to understand, oh, this is how we mesh together, and you don't have to slow yourselves by trying to develop something you don't have. Now you know exactly what you and your teammates have, and you can lean on each other and begin putting together the gears and moving even faster.
Yeah, and I can also see how that takes the morality out of it, because, as a human tendency is to judge others according to our own values. But once you've laid out objectively a set of attributes, and you can understand that they're neither good nor bad, that it's all on context, not just situational, but the rest of your team.
I'm glad you brought that up, because judgment slows teams down. And when you understand the attributes, like you said, it takes away judgment. I no longer look at this person as, oh my God, that's so frustrating because that person's too slow. And that's only because I'm impatient and that person's patient. Right now, I look at this person as, oh, wait a second. That person is exactly who I need when we need to slow down, or that person is exactly who I need when we need to speed up. And so it removes judgment, which speeds up teams.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we've got these 20, you call them the 25 hidden drivers of optimal performance, these 25 attributes. Yeah. How did you come up with them, and how do you know that they're a good set?
Yeah. Well, so there's now 41. I wrote about 25 in the book.
Oh, okay. I'm out of date. Sorry.
Yeah. So the assessment you're taking, there's 41 attributes. But when I wrote the book, I knew there were more than 25. I wanted to focus in on kind of what I deemed at the time to be more meaningful. And then I knew we could beef up the list later. But what we did was, I looked at several different factors. I looked at all the different personality assessments, but then I began to also ask, okay, what are the elemental drivers of human behavior? One. Number two, is this trait or attribute something that that can be taught or can't be taught? So a quick way to determine whether or not you're dealing with an attribute or a skill is to ask yourself, can I teach it or can it be taught? If the answer is yes, it's probably a skill. If its answer is no, it's probably an attribute. So you could say, Rich, I want to learn how to shoot a pistol and hit a bullseye. Okay, I could take you to the range and teach you how to do that within a couple hours. That's a skill. Or you could say, Rich, I want to learn how to be more patient. I can't teach you how to be more patient, right? So attributes must be self-developed. You can't teach them to people.
Yeah,
we could talk about how to develop attributes later, but it has to go through that criteria. So is it something that has to be developed? It can't be taught. Is it something that shows up in very small children? That's another criteria, right? And if the answer is yes, it's likely an attribute because, again, certain things that people think of, for example, self-awareness. Self-awareness we've kind of thrown that around. I've talked to people about whether or not that's an attribute, but the idea is self-awareness is not something that you see generally in small kids. It's also, certainly it's not something that can be taught, so it passes that test, but it's not something you generally see in small kids. And it's also not very elemental. It's not the most elemental. In other words, self-awareness comes from a couple of different attributes. It comes from curiosity. It comes from humility, right? So certain attributes actually help us get to self-awareness. So that's the kind of the litmus test in terms of these. And we kind of went through that. And in developing the 25 and then now the 41, we kind of put it through the ringer. And then, of course, stay open-minded. I keep on I'm always talking to psychologists. I'm always talking to people to see if there's more we could add to the list, and also just continue to verify the ones we have on the list. So,
no, well, that makes a lot of sense, and it makes that distinction as you've just laid it out between skill and attribute.
Yeah,
very clear. And even as you were talking there, I could feel a little bit of a sting because I thought, self-awareness is something I have a high value for.
Yeah.
And I can fall into the trap of judging others when they don't have it.
Well,
but even as you're talking, I'm like, well, maybe they're not particularly high on curiosity and humility. So
yeah, that's right.
Why would they be self-aware, or why would they even care about it?
Yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. And I think that's a real important, if there's one super important aspect of this in terms of attributes, it's, we say, first of all, it allows you a performance picture that's non-judgmental. There's no good or bad. It just allows you a real introspection on your own performance and where it serves you and where it might not serve you. And then it allows you to eliminate judgment of others, and say, hey, wait, I'm no longer judging this human based on that. But B, as a leader of teams, it allows you to now start looking at and assessing performance from a whole new light. In other words, you may have someone who's underperforming, but it's not because they are inept or incapable. It's because they may be in a role that's not congruent to the attribute set that they're bringing to the table. And just by shifting them, you might see their performance skyrocket. This happened to me. I was commanding officer of a SEAL team, and I had a supply department, and there was about 8 people. One half of that 8 was focused on future acquisitions and kind of innovative stuff and getting, new ideas. The other half was focused on administrative stuff, log keeping and things like that. I had a sailor in the future acquisition side who was grossly underperforming. I was bringing morale down. And so I brought the sailor into my office, began to have a conversation, and within about 10 minutes realized that this person's attributes were absolutely not aligned with what we were asking this person to do. However, they were beautifully aligned for this other piece. So all I did was shift this sailor from the future acquisitions to the admin side, and performance skyrocketed, right? And so suddenly I could just change seats on a bus, and now I'm aligning people with their true performance picture. That's the power of this in teams as well.
Yeah, I can see how much that could alleviate a lot of headaches for managers.
Yeah,
and leaders. Yeah. And so I'm guessing in the future, I was real time thinking, what could that be? So I'm guessing the curiosity, open-mindedness, something like that was not high for this person who was in.
I don't remember the exact, but yeah, certainly curiosity was one. There were a couple other ones. Whereas one she was very high on was discernment, and discernment is this real ability to kind of notice and pick out details, right? And so and that's perfect, right? Just discernment, just to explain discernment for folks. It's this ability to kind of notice and recognize details, okay? And the example I'll give is my wife and I, we run our company. we are both low on discernment. Okay. Now our COO is very high on discernment. So what does that mean? It means anytime a contract comes through us, we immediately give it to our COO, because if my wife and I look at it, we're going to miss stuff. We're not detail oriented, but my COO will pick out details that need to be picked out. Now, that's advantageous for us because we can be big picture thinkers. We don't let details get in the way of kind of this kind of planning and big picture. Disadvantageous when it comes to needing to notice things. And so this is where teaming happens, and so we get all of our contracts to our COO because she will discern all the details we need to discern, whereas we think big picture kind of strategy. So you can see how there's no judgment. There's you start to understand the strengths of each and start to mesh them together. So in this case, this sailor was high on discernment, so the administrating log keeping was perfect for her.
Right. Yeah. It needs to my relationship with my business partner. Yeah. Don't ask me to read a contract.
Yeah. That's right.
He's great at it though. But yeah. But what I can see here is this bolsters one's natural intuition, right? I obviously have a natural intuition there, and have a level of self-awareness that allows me to make those kind of judgments. But I can see how having a system-wise way of thinking through this stuff could help.
Yeah, I think the thing that really excites us is when you begin to articulate this stuff that in many ways was hard to articulate. We heard things like soft skills and character traits and stuff like that, but when you begin to articulate things with precision, you then can translate it and bring it cross context. So in other words, I can take the same stuff I used in the SEALs and use it in business or use it in other contexts. And B, you can teach it and you can give people a opportunity to teach and improve these things, because now you can name it and you can start to really define it, which really helps in that process. And that's what kind of excites us is the precision with which people can start to understand and interrogate their own and their teammates' performance.
Yeah. Now, you touched on it earlier about developing attributes.
Yeah.
Well, can we develop attributes? And if so, how?
Yes, we can develop attributes. You just can't do it the same way you do a skill. So developing attributes takes three things. First, I need to know that I'm low on it. I need that it can be developed. Second, it needs to have a motivation, desire, or need to develop it. What do I mean by that? It's because of what I said before. Just because you're low on an attribute does not mean you need to develop it. In other words, developing that attribute may be detrimental to what you're trying to do. Okay. I always say the stand-up comic with too much empathy is going to be a lousy stand-up comic. Okay. So we have to understand that our low attributes are in many cases exactly what we need. However, sometimes it does help to develop. So if you have those, I have one, I have two, I do need to develop it. Then the third one's the most important. You have to go seek out and find environments that test and tease and develop that attribute. So if you want to develop patience, you have to go find environments that test and tease your patience, whatever that might look like for you. It could be I'm going to go deliberately drive in traffic. It could be I'm going to pick the longest line in the grocery store to stand in. I always say have kids. Having kids will develop patience. Okay, but you can do that with any attribute. So you can develop attribute. That often takes some time and effort to do that. Okay. The other thing you can do though is in lieu of developing an attribute, you can just begin to practice dialing up and dialing down attributes. In other words, I'm going to dial up an attribute in a moment because I make a conscious decision that I need to, or I'm going to dial down an attribute in a moment. So dialing up an attribute would be, again, we can use patience. It's an easy one. In certain environments, if I lean towards impatience, so I'm just low on patience naturally, there are going to be environments where I say, okay, in this environment, I need to consciously, deliberately dial up my patience. It's going to take conscious effort, but you can do it. All of us can do it. And you do it for the moment and you dial that up. That is also an effective tool. You can do the same thing in dialing down attributes, because sometimes the attributes we're high on, there come times where it doesn't serve us and we may need to dial something down. A great example and a funny one is one of my buddies. He came up his number one attribute, top one, was humor. And I said to him, I said, hey, are there times you need to dial that down? He's like, oh yes, there are times I need to dial it down, because sometimes in an environment where the joke I want to tell is just not appropriate, I need to dial down my humor. So dialing up and dialing down attributes is a quicker way to kind of address. And in fact, most of us as humans do this without thinking, or do this without recognizing it. In other words, a lot of us might be one way at home, and at work we're different, right? And it's because what's happening is our attribute list is the same. Our attributes don't change between work and home. What happens is in one of those environments, we're dialing up or dialing down these attributes to just adjust to that environment. So the hope is you can align yourself so that you don't have to do much dialing up and dialing down. We all will have to in certain cases, but if you can align your business, your professional and personal life in a way that you're actually most natural, you're going to be the most comfortable, the most happy, and then you're just dialing down, you're dialing up or down on occasion, versus you're a whole different person at work than you are at home.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And do you find, obviously having had a lot of experience with this suite of attributes, that there are any in particular that you find it's useful for people to be aware of, either in themselves or in others in teams? Are there the ones that sort of frequently trip people up? I'm curious.
Well, I would say, I try not to place a value on any of this stuff. I would say if I were to be up against a wall and have to say what I think some of the most important are, I think the grit attributes are some of the most important. In other words, courage, perseverance, adaptability, and resilience. Because as humans in this life, if we don't have some semblance of courage, perseverance, resilience, and adaptability, it's going to be a rough ride. And so I think those are certainly important. I think the mental acuity ones, situation awareness, compartmentalization, task switching, learnability, and discernment are also important, because everything starts with our brain anyway. But I think those would probably be the ones I say as humans in this life. Those are some we may want to take a look at and see where we are, because life requires it. None of us live in a utopia that's butterflies and unicorns the whole time, right? So,
right. No. Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me you've said mental acuity, especially in this age, as we've talked about with this and compartmentalization, especially.
Yeah.
Given just the barrage of distractions we're faced with day to day.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm guessing is that attribute, one's ability to develop it, being eroded for kids right now with the tech environment?
So, no, I would say no, because developing is developing. Do I think that the kids today are hyper developing their task switching? Yes, I think they are. Now that could be
that's a positive, right?
Yes.
All of that.
So we can say that that could be beneficial or that could be detrimental. We can find both. We can find reasons for both. But I would say that just from a beneficial part, I mean, kids' brains are moving faster than our brains were as we were growing up. And growing up, I didn't have. I mean, the first computer came out when I was a kid, and so the fact that we had this stuff, the world wasn't moving as fast, and the world just moves faster and faster. And I think that's a type of human evolution that's going to exist, and we're going to see that. So I'm not pessimistic about the environment and how attributes are developing around the environment. I do think we need to be cognizant, though, of perhaps cheating ourselves of certain experiences if we don't take somewhat control over things like task switching, attention shifting and things like that. I think there's a real beauty and power in to be able to focus. There's a beauty and power to be able to, what I call, kind of be inside your own head and imagine. I mean, when I was a kid, we'd take long road trips, and I just stare at the window. I stare out the window for hours. But there was no, I didn't have a Walkman. I didn't have a phone. I just stared out the window and just daydreamed. And I just think that's a gift in many cases that people should give themselves once in a while. We don't have to be entertained all the time. And we can, and I think the process of entertaining oneself or being in oneself's head, thinking about ideas, thinking about things, I think that's a gift. We should give ourselves more often.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And that presumably helps to develop the attribute of patience as well.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, because I take my kids on canoeing trips. It's what's coming to mind. And, we're sort of 15 minutes paddling down the river. And it's,
yeah.
I can't stare at another bunch of reeds, Daddy. I'm like, but the beauty.
I know. Take it in. Just relax. Take a breath. I know. Yeah. The world moves fast.
And what's also fascinating is that just the adaptability, right?
Yeah.
And the kids will start like making up games to play in the canoe, or they'll start getting interested in the plant life. Or,
I read an article, and I can't remember, many months ago about I was down some Google rabbit hole, and I read about the first guy, one of the first guys, or the first guy to ever drive a car, right? And back in the first days of cars, I don't even think it was a steering wheel. I think it was just like some sticks that are paddles that the guy was using to steer. But the car was going max speed was like 2 miles an hour. And the guy could barely keep it on the road at 2 miles an hour, right? To steer this thing, because his brain wasn't wired that way. And so you think about the brain wiring that goes on nowadays compared to what it was before. It's fascinating. I mean, we're driving 80 miles an hour without even thinking about it, and watching things pass, and our brains just wired differently. So we just have to understand that that's evolution, and that's what technology does. So if we were put in a time capsule and shot ahead 200 years, we would probably be just downright terrified at how fast things were moving, and how fast people's brains were moving. Assuming we go on the same trajectory we have been. That, I guess you can't make that assumption, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I do what you're saying. What I appreciate from this conversation is, this seems to be a theme I wasn't expecting from our chat, was that taking the morality out, right? Like I come into this conversation with a sort of bias around, technology is bad for kids, and it's destroying attention spans, and I love this as a corrective, right? It's really, I like that. I'm intrigued now. You've been out of the Navy for a while. What's different about leading in civvy land versus being in the army is one thing I'm curious about. And then secondly, do you miss that world? And if so, what do you miss?
Yeah, so let me start with the first one, or the second question first. I don't necessarily miss the Navy. I look back fondly on it. I think missing is, again, missing in my mind is it's putting emotion towards something you can't change, right? And that's energetically expensive. So, but I look back fondly on my time in the Navy, and if I were to be honest and say I miss anything, it'd be the humor that, the camaraderie and the humor that we had. We would just laugh at anything, and it'd be the most miserable circumstance, and someone would crack a joke and you start laughing. But honestly, I still get that, because I still see guys I served with. I have coffee with them, and we have lunch together, and we get to do some of that to some degree. So that's something. In terms of the difference, what I've learned since leaving the Navy and being in the leadership space, I've learned so much about leadership since leaving the Navy, even though I was a leader in the Navy. And what I've learned is that leadership is about how we interact with human beings. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with being in charge. In fact, being in charge is a position, and being a leader is a behavior. And you don't get to self-designate. In other words, you don't get to call yourself a leader. That's like calling yourself good looking or funny, right? Other people decide whether or not you are someone what they want to follow based on the way you behave. And so as I look back on my experience as someone in charge, in the Navy, I recognize that there were certainly several times that I was being considered a leader, and I still get notes here and there from people I've served with, and like, hey, I loved working with you and for you, and I thought of you as a leader, and that's always good. It's always wonderful to hear. I also recognize there were times that I was not behaving as a leader, and I was just the guy in charge, and that I know that had effect. So I think for me, this lesson translates across contexts, whether you are leading a SEAL platoon or leading a group of trainers or facilitators or surgeons, right? In the civilian world, it's all about how you interact with human beings, and it's all about these behaviors that allow you to bring the best out of those people in your span of care. And so I don't think there's much difference. We could talk about skills and competencies and things like that. And we could talk about culture. Culture is different, certainly, but the culture is going to be different whether you're in a SEAL team or a different, one organization, one building on Fifth Avenue might have a completely different culture than that building next to it. One floor might have a different culture than the fifth floor might have a different culture than the sixth floor, right? So I think culture changes based on that, but the basic tenets of leadership, I think, are universal.
Right. Is there a difference in terms of the caliber of the people? Because I'm imagining you're leading these elite of the elite, right, in the
Yeah,
Navy,
yeah,
and that was a lot of the spaces you operated in. Presumably, you've come into a world where there's a much bigger variance in just sort of
sure.
general caliber of individual, without putting too fine a point on it. Do you find that presents its own challenge?
Yeah, yes. I mean, yes and no. The caliber of individuals certainly. I mean, certainly, I will concede that we had a selection process that weeded out a bunch of folks, and so we were left with. I was certainly left with a very high caliber level of individual in terms of their competence. Okay, but in terms of human beings, we're all different, and I think any environment, any team, regardless of how elite, is still a microcosm of society. Right. In other words, you have some folks on that. You have some folks that you're like, man, this is some of the best humans I've met in the world. And you have folks like, yeah, that's not really a human I really want to hang out with. In the SEAL case, it'd be like that person makes the hair on my neck stand up, right? So I think you always have a scale of both. For the most part, the majority, the predominance of the folks I served with were absolute stellar rock stars, and I loved that. And I loved having that gift of being able to work with folks like that. But I think I do believe that you can find that even in civilian teams. You just have to understand the human. I mean, we're all human. We all relate. It's all about interaction. And if you're interacting together as a team and it's just flowing and it's cool and it's magical, that's going to feel just as good as any other team that's interacting. So I just don't think it's context specific,
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I love that description there of its magic and its flowing. And attributes are clearly part of the answer. But
Yes, of course. Yeah.
what are the other, in your experience, what are the other factors that come into play to have a magical team that's flowing?
Well, I think the most important is the vulnerability for people on teams to understand, hey, the more I can show my strengths and my weaknesses. In other words, I wear all of my strengths and all of my weaknesses on my sleeve, transparent to all, so that now they know exactly what they need, what I'm going to need from them, when I'm going to be leaning on them, and they also know exactly when they can lean on me. I think that vulnerability and transparency is absolutely required for any high-performing team, because that builds trust. And trust, if we were to talk about a foundational element of any high-performing team, it's trust. But that vulnerability builds that trust. And that vulnerability includes understanding our attributes, understanding our skills, understanding everything we bring to the table as a teammate, and understanding that it's the behaviors that allow us to be designated great teammates. That's, again, these are universal truths which cross the context of any team, whether it be a 1,000-person team or a 2-person team, like my wife and I.
Mm.
It works with any team, any size.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. Okay, we're coming up on time here. I know you've got a hard stop, so I'm curious to know where you're going next. Where do you want your attributes incorporated to be in 5 years' time? What's your plan for world domination, Rich?
Yeah, well, we are working on scaling the attributes so that we can get it to more people, more businesses, more countries. The book is now in 7 languages, which is wonderful, and we've been all around the world with the attributes content, and it's resonating. And so we're going to begin to certify people in the attributes contents. The other thing is I've got the second book coming out. So we're on so that's coming out here probably January of next year. And that will be another kind of iteration on how people can do better in stress, challenge, and uncertainty. The second book is called Masters of Uncertainty, which is how I always describe the Navy SEALs. It was never about the shooting or the skydiving or all the stuff you see in Hollywood. It's about the fact that we were individuals and teams that could drop into complexity and begin to perform. And the idea is every human can be this, every team can be this. It just takes a few things that one needs to know about themselves and do both physically and physiologically. Obviously, one very important thing we need to know about ourselves is our attributes. So that's obviously included in the new book too, as an aside. But yeah, that's where we're going. We're going to help as many people as we can with this stuff.
Brilliant! I love that. What a mission. And are you picking? Obviously, you're engrossed in this as a mission right now. But do you have a sense of where this whole topic of leadership development is heading? What's your sense on where we're headed to as a sector, if you like?
Well, I think with the advent and now proliferation of AI, what we have to all concede is that the skills-based training is going to start being less and less necessary, because we don't even know. First of all, AI is going to start taking over some of these jobs that are skills-based. And we just, the environment's changing so fast that we just don't know what 2 years, 3 years down the road is going to look like, which for me means that we have to do better at understanding our own selves, our own performance, and working, in fact, on these qualities that allow us to adapt and flex and move in the constantly ever-changing environment, versus focused on just doing something one thing or something over and over again, kind of rote. So I think we are headed into an environment of more change and uncertainty, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I think I think evolution is predominantly a good thing, and I think learning more, knowing more, figuring out more, discovering more is what we're bent to do. But as people in the industry, in any industry, we have to focus on the qualities that allow us and our teams to do that, and that's why it's of the most important to us to get this stuff out to people.
Got it. Great, thank you. Yeah, and great point on on skills development becoming less of a thing. That makes total sense. Great. Okay. Well, I know we're on time, so just remains to thank you. We'll put a link to the book again, the Attributes, the book. We'll put a link to platform. Do you just want to share the URL for the platform so people can?
Yeah, really easy. Just www.theattributes.com. And yeah, we'll get you a link, and I think we're also going to get you a discount code for your listeners for the assessment.
Oh, fantastic!
Thank you, Rich, as well. So
yeah, and there's a it's not just the assessment, so you can figure out what your attributes are. There's a whole bunch of other resources.
There's a whole bunch of other resources. So yeah,
which is brilliant. Wonderful.
Thank
you once again. This has been awesome. I really appreciate your time, Rich.
I appreciate being here. Thank you.